Hi, it's Nicholas Thompson. I'm CEO of The Atlantic, and this is The Most Interesting Thing in AI, a podcast produced by Rethink, The Atlantic's creative marketing studio, in collaboration with PwC, a leader in helping organizations use AI. So today I'm going to interview this fabulous woman, Navrina Singh, who I've known for about 5 years. She runs this really interesting company, Credo AI, that sort of works orthogonally to the way most of the AI industry works. Like most of the AI industry, particularly in the United States right now, is just all gas, no brakes. We have to go faster than China. The future of the world is at stake. Liberal democracy must create the world's greatest AI. And Navrina believes all that, believes it's really important to build the biggest and best AI here. But she also believes you have to get governance right. You have to get regulatory policy right. She advises lots of governments. She believes that companies need to figure out exactly what biases are built into the data they've trained on, into the AI systems they've built, exactly how that could affect their outcomes, the bots they build, the systems they use. So she's working through her company, Credo AI, with all kinds of companies to deal with their own internal, external governance issues. And she's trying to do it in such a way that she believes will actually speed up AI. She feels if you get this right, well, AI goes faster here and the benefits come faster, not slower. So she's an interesting character. Here's my conversation with Navrina Singh. Navrina Singh, welcome to The Most Interesting Thing in AI.
Nick, thank you so much for having me here today.
Oh, it's a total pleasure to have you here. Navrina, I want to start with one of the kind of canonical things that happens in AI in 2016. And, you grew up in India, come to this country, get an advanced degree. You go work at Qualcomm. You do really interesting work in AI very early. And then you join Microsoft shortly after there's this very important incident involving their chatbot called Tay. Why don't you tell me a little bit about that incident, what you learned from it, and how it helped shape the work you would later do at Credo AI?
Absolutely, Nick. So right before I joined, what had happened is Microsoft had launched a conversational AI chatbot called Tay. And if we recall, it was launched on Twitter and it went from zero to racist in like a matter of hours. And I think the ripple effects from that were pretty massive. And the ripple effect was really around this recognition when you have something really powerful, something that can actually learn based on the conversations that's happening in the wild, and in this case, the Twitter audience. How do you actually make sure that it continues to still serve the objective it was established to? And I think that was a pretty big aha moment, that when you have machine learning and AI applications that have this massive impact, that have this massive scale, how do you make sure that they're doing the right things? How do you govern them? And who's accountable for the decisions that these systems end up making? And that, I would say, was a pretty defining moment for me in my career, because having worked in machine learning and AI since 2011, this moment really articulated the need for responsibility in engineering and technology.
And was the problem with Tay that users hijacked it? Was it that Twitter by itself was just the wrong data set to introduce a chatbot to? What was the specific lesson from that?
One is, I think, this need for governance much earlier in the development of these AI systems. As you can imagine, very smart AI engineers, data scientists, product managers are building these systems, but they don't have the idea around compliance and governance. The second thing is, when you're introducing an AI system which is learning on the fly based on the data it's being fed because of reinforcement learning, it starts to become smarter and smarter based on the data it's getting exposed to. So I think really thinking about post-deployment scenarios and environments, are the right users interacting with it so that you can actually understand the guardrails that need to be put in place. And then the third big lesson, I think, from this was really, what is the risk paradigm we should be thinking about? What is low risk versus what's high risk? How do you define it? How do you define that within the context of a business?
Yeah. Microsoft is not at all a reckless company. They watch out for lots of things. And I think we just didn't know then that it's like a child, right? And you take a child and you have responsible parents and they read it Dr. Seuss and the Wizard of Oz or whatever you read it. The kid learns about the world, but if you have a child who ages, 0 to 30 in one day and you just read it Mein Kampf, like it's going to end up as a problematic child.
I think that's a great analogy, though I refrain from comparing AI to humans. But you are right. I think with this very fast learning technology, one of the key things that we need to understand and put in place more effectively is how do you actually launch this into the world with the notion that this is an experiment, it's going to iterate, it's going to become better. And I think having that transparency around how do you actually manage the parameters becomes really critical.
Right. I mean, for Tay, there was transparency, right? You could see everything that it was learning, right? It was just basically learning on what people told it. With current AI models, we have a separate transparency issue.
Yeah, I think there's two kinds of transparency. Actually, there's multiple kind of transparencies now in the AI supply chain, which is getting so complex, Nick. And I think we can spend hours discussing that. But I think one of the core things, the transparency in case of Tay needed to be around, how advanced is the system, what this system is capable of, what it's not capable of. Yes, it is going to feed off user information and data. And then, yes, it might take certain actions or might respond in a way that is not the responsibility or accountability of Microsoft. I think those kinds of transparency requirements were not as well formed. Now, how many years later, 5 to 10 years later, I would say that we've learned our lessons. And now we are becoming very careful about what that transparency and accountability really looks like.
So you spent a couple years at Microsoft. You work on these issues. You learn a lot. Company improves during that period. And then you make the decision to start Credo AI. I can't remember exactly. I think it was the first time we met. It was right after you started. But didn't you start at like March 12th, 2020? I have this vague recollection that you started at the worst possible day to start a company. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, Nick. Yes, I think my timing is always immaculate. So I registered Credo AI end of February, Feb 28th, and we started working on the baseline technology, I would say March 18th.
Did you rent an office, Navrina?
Thankfully not. I didn't realize what would happen in a week. And a week after starting the business with a handful of contractors and some investors, yes, we are in shutdown. And now I have to go hire people. I have to go figure out what to build in a completely remote environment. I have to go and talk to leads and prospects, potentially over Zoom. And obviously not the kind of startup I wanted to start, but I think it was pretty foundational to how we've grown as a company in the past 5 years.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you say always immaculate timing, because in one way you launch it right before the pandemic starts, which makes it a hard time to fundraise, makes it a hard time to build community and cohesion. On the other hand, you timed it perfectly and launched it 2.5 years before ChatGPT comes out. But explain what Credo AI does, and then explain exactly how it's used right now.
Credo AI is an AI governance SaaS platform. We also have an on-prem. That means especially regulated and government clients, they can actually install our software on their premises, on their hardware. And what Credo AI platform does is it helps companies do three things really well. One is, as you can imagine, foundation models can be applied to so many different use cases. Credo AI helps with alignment around what do you need to measure and specifically how you need to measure it. The second thing that Credo AI does is it helps you within that context not only measure those different scenarios, but also measure risks and provides risk mitigations across potential risks that you might be experiencing within that application. And the third thing that we do, as you can imagine, is for a lot of our businesses that we serve, especially Global 2000 companies, everyone from financial services to pharma to healthcare, they do also have a lot of regulatory and compliance requirements. So we help them also get to compliance, to emerging AI standards, to existing rules and regulations, but also importantly to their own company policies. Again, tying it back to the Tay example, Microsoft had very robust transparency requirements. But how do you put that in practice in a standardized way across all the AI application that Microsoft is launching? That's where Credo AI really comes in.
So I don't know, let's say I'm a bank, I'm a major bank, and I'm using AI in all kinds of ways to both provide customer service, but also to maybe provide a little bit, first level financial advice to my customers. How am I using Credo AI to help make this work? You're checking all of my data sets. You're checking how the AI is used to make sure it's compliant both with federal law and state law, wherever we are, or international law if we're operating in the EU. And then you're also making sure that there aren't certain biases built into our training data? What else are you checking?
Nick, if you had asked me this question 5 years ago, the answer would have been as simple as you just articulated. But actually, it's way more complex now because the AI supply chain is becoming very complex. So, in this case, let's take an example that a bank is launching a customer service chatbot. And if the bank is launching that customer service chatbot, let's also make an assumption that they are building this chatbot based on maybe some of the foundation model providers, their systems like GPT-5 or Sonnet 4.5, but they also might be using open source models. They also might throw in maybe their own proprietary models into the mix. So on and on and on, this supply chain that is going to power this customer service now became very, very complex. It has open source models, proprietary, and it has foundation models. Credo AI is always looking at the context. And for us, it is the customer success. That is the domain. That is what we figure out risk within. We don't just look at the model level risk because, as you can imagine, a lot of these companies need to be dealing with those model level risk at their own level. So what we do is we look across your entire supply chain where we have access to data sets. So in case of proprietary models, because we are connected into the data and AI infrastructure, we can actually see the proprietary models are powered by different data sets. But in case of open source, we don't have access to the data sets that those models might be trained on. And same thing for the foundation model providers. So we actually categorize that as massive risk, that we don't have any provenance or lineage of the data sets that they're trained on. Those data sets might be completely unfair, might have a lot of toxicity, might not even be reliable. So we start to flag all those risks. And within the proprietary models, obviously, we have more information around assessment of these systems, whether we want this customer service chatbot to be not toxic, we want it to be nice, maybe the personality is really good, we want it to be reliable 99% of the time. We don't want any adversarial attacks. That means that a bad actor, might not inject bad prompts into this customer service chatbot. So we control all those things. But more importantly, Nick, we control that across the entire AI lifecycle from the design to development to production so that when these systems are in production, we are actively monitoring them for these ongoing risk and mitigations.
All right, so let's say that, I run this bank and I really don't want my customer service bot to make racist comments to the people who are chatting with it, right? There are all kinds of behaviors that are very hard to predict. How do you make sure that the bot doesn't say nasty racist things to the customers?
Nick, I think this is where the role of transparency and accountability becomes really critical. We can measure only certain things. We cannot measure everything. And so the things that we can measure, especially within the proprietary models, we go and measure those, interrogate those, and pretty with high level of confidence, we can say, oh, the data sets that this particular proprietary model has been trained on is demographically diverse. We believe with high level of confidence, it is going to provide customer service to all different kinds of people 99% of the time. The problem is with the remaining models, which are open source or coming from foundation model, we cannot give that guarantee. And so in this case, the transparency report becomes really critical. That is, what is the bank willing to take on as a potential liability? And what is a bank willing to say that they've done testing against and the things that they can't back up? And so this is why we are pretty big active supporters of transparency and disclosure reporting in the new AI systems, which are getting very complex.
Well, and I'm all in favor of it too, mostly because the big AI companies took all of our data in the middle of the night, violated our terms of service, did not compensate us, and then don't disclose what they trained on, partly because they don't want to face all the copyright lawsuits. Sounds like maybe, Navrina, you're on team. Everybody should really explain what they trained on and maybe pay some licensing fees or make some fair exchange of values while that happens.
Absolutely, Nick, though very difficult and complex to do. I totally agree. I think that's the word we should be heading. I know. And I'm actually really excited about, the work that companies like Cloudflare and others are doing in terms of really making sure that we don't have these AI sprawlers trying to train on every data, which, by the way, in terms of human and machine collaboration, when should humans be compensated versus not? I think it's a very important emerging topic we should all be dealing with. So yes, I'm in that camp, but a tough problem to solve.
Well, and you're in the camp from a different but very interesting reason, right? I'm in that camp because I work in the media production business, and I think it's unfair. I think that if somebody takes your stuff and then makes a business on it that is competitive with your business, there should be a fair exchange of value in some way or the other. So I'm in it for the fairness argument, but you're in it for the world would look a lot better and you could have a lot safer models if we knew what these things were trained on.
I truly believe that AI is going to be one of the most transformational technologies. And when
Totally.
something is so transformational, which is going to result in a new era of human evolution, in that, I think we need to make sure that we have the right accountability and transparency of these systems. And that I think is only possible if you have good governed AI system. And that's what we are working hard on.
Right. All right. So let's go back into the work that you do. So what you do is you mentioned that you want to make sure that the data sets, at least as far as you can verify them, are demographically diverse.
Yeah, I think beyond fairness, there's a lot of AI challenges, but this one is a really important one because if we want this AI technology to serve everyone, it needs to make sure that it is actually accounting for that everyone in product development and testing. And many a times we forget what constitutes that everyone. It's not just a certain set of people, the male developers, it's actually female developers and testers and consumers, right? And so it's interesting, very early on, we were working on a vocoder design, which basically most of my development team was all men. And this was very early on in my career, by the way, Nick. So we did amazing testing on all the samples, which were obviously coming from a data set which was primarily male dominated. And as you can hear on this podcast, my pitch is much higher than men. And so this vocoder would actually end up chopping off all the female voices at certain points. So how can you actually build a cell phone technology or a system which is removing more than 50% of the population? So there was always this idea that technology, unfortunately, is not as fair. So one of the ways that we can make it fair is by making sure that the people who are working on this technology are representative of who we are serving, because products are a reflection of people who worked on it. And I think that is internally something that I've carried on in my 20 years in tech. And now it's unfortunately getting so massively amplified in AI. And that's why we need to be much more thoughtful and careful about who's building and designing these systems. Because at the end of the day, we do need to take responsibility for the products we are putting out in the world, because it's not just who they're going to impact. Like, we are becoming so much better with AI, but we should also think who are not becoming better with AI, who are getting left behind. Instead of saying certain jobs will be eliminated, I think the bigger concern I have is that there's going to be a widening gap and stratification that ends up happening because some people who have access to AI start to get access to more versus others not.
But do you think that's happening? Do you think AI is making the world less equal?
Oh, absolutely. I see that. I wouldn't say that it's AI. I think it's humans are making the choice.
Well, of course, right? I mean, it may be the case that the world is becoming less equal, but AI should be the great equalizer. Right? We all have access to the same models. The open source models are almost as good as the foundation models. They can be built into all kinds of systems. Like, do you think it is inevitable that AI will make the world less equal?
Again, we are at this crossroad, right? And I think it's going to depend on the human choice, but it is also going to depend upon how we build these systems. I'll give you a very simple example. Right now, most of the foundation model providers are doing a great job training on data from West. But if you start thinking about Global South, we are not doing a great job training on, languages like the countries I come from India. So I do worry about if we are not taking control and making choices in how we are building this technology. That's one, I would say, path we will go down on. But the second path is us as human not choosing to use AI day in, day out to really, augment our work. So that's another choice that we have at this crossroads. So both these choices are actually going to dictate how equal and not equal a world we live in.
After the break, I ask Navrina Singh about which AI policy she likes best. Her answer might surprise you. Can I explain to you what my fear is, Navrina?
Yeah.
I feel like you're one of the good guys in AI, right? And that you're trying really hard to prevent stuff from getting out of control, and you're trying to help us get to explainability and openness, what people are training on. But that because of the fear here in the United States about China, because of the ideology of some of the folks who are leading the AI race, because of the amount of money at stake, this stuff is just getting pushed to the side. And when I was working at Wired, before the ChatGPT moment, there was all this conversation about ethics and AI. We talked about it all the time. And then ChatGPT comes in, there's this race, right? There's trillions of dollars at stake. And then there's this incredible fight between like Sam Altman and Elon Musk and who will be the most powerful person in the world and like seed the intelligence of the universe. And because of that, like all the folks pushing for explainability and transparency are just going to get steamrolled. That's my fear.
So let me explain where I stand on that. So first and foremost, just maybe in the last 2 months, we are already getting beat by China in open source. If you look at Alibaba's Quen model and how often it's been distilled and used by everybody, it's insane, right? So it is a true race. And I do believe that the country or set of allies who end up owning the AI stack will have a really upper hand. But I also believe, Nick, that most of these AI systems will need governance, will need this trust as the foundational layer. This AI stack that we talk about requires the foundational trust OS or operating system that is going to be critical for it to work reliably, to work effectively. So having said that, I believe that yes, the governance and guardrails is really critical. But you also bring up a really good point. Is equal amount of investment being made in this space? Absolutely not.
Right.
We are seeing this in venture capital, right? So if you look at the companies, even though there's been increase in the number of companies in AI governance space, in AI security space, the amount of dollars that are going to it is less than 0.1% of what's going to foundation model providers and others. So yes, that discrepancy in investment in dollars is an indication of how much do you care about the space.
You've staked out a pretty interesting position in the last minute, which is you are like deeply concerned about U.S. falling behind China, but you also believe that we do really need to care about this bundle of issues of transparency and ethics and so on. So what would you say to someone like Elon or Mark Andreessen who makes the argument, if China wins the AI race, then we will have dictatorial AI and humanity will be governed in a way that is not in the interests of anybody who cares about liberalism and democracy. And that you, Navrina, with your work are in fact making that more likely. How can you hold both positions?
I actually can, because history is always a good indication of what works and doesn't work. And I'll give you an example, a little bit technical, but 10, 15 years ago, DevOps became like the most important thing because we found out that if you actually adhere to a certain set of processes and alignment, the likelihood of not only that software getting shipped faster over time would increase, but also the likelihood of that software not failing when it was put in production was much lower. So I think we are seeing the same thing in all the customers that we are serving. Yes, there is a little bit upfront work you have to do to make sure you have the hygiene of good governance. But once you have the foundational AI lifecycle development processes, including governance, what ends up happening is one, you can adopt AI much faster as a company. And we are seeing this, by the way, across government. We are seeing this across private sector. Second is you're able to actually embed AI in applications that you're putting out to customers much faster. But more importantly, and this is what I get excited about, the AI systems you're putting out actually have less errors when you actually have these governance processes put in place. Obviously, if you have a governance process which is super bureaucratic, needs everyone in the company to approve it, and you're very conservative in your risk and everything is high risk, it's not going to work. And so this is where expertise of Credo AI becomes really critical, because sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. And I think that's exactly what's happening in governance.
Sometimes you have to go slow to go fast. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. It's not just that the United States needs to win the AI race in an ethical way. It's that building these values in from the base will make it more likely that the U.S. wins the AI race. I like that argument, Navrina.
At the end of the day, you have to trust these technologies. Nick, my dad was in the Indian military for 40 years, and I know what it takes and the amount of equipment they have to carry when they're in this war zone, and to have the situational awareness when everything around them is dark, right? So these soldiers are carrying 60, 65 pounds worth of equipment, and a lot of this equipment now is AI powered. And so a big part of making sure that this equipment actually serves our soldiers and is a force multiplier for them on ground, if you think about how this intelligence needs to be very reliable, the only way that's going to be possible is if you actually have governance in place throughout the AI lifecycle. I was just in DC and I was talking to some of our government clients. And so I become more and more convicted when I go and speak to the agencies we are serving or the clients that we have in government, that how critical governance is to making sure it's not just about the values, but it's making sure the reliability of these systems, the security of these systems is actually at the level that our soldiers can trust us and trust our technology.
Let's talk a little bit about regulation and governance. So you've advised multiple U.S. governments. You've been on all kinds of commissions. You play a big role in this conversation. What are the most important principles for AI governance? Which are the most important regulatory conversations? And then what are the most important decisions to make within those regulatory conversations?
Past 5.5 years, I've been really fortunate not only to advise the US government, but also to advise a lot of our allies. And based on all the standards and regulations and policies that are emerging in the ecosystem, we've actually come up with what we call as some common ground frameworks which work irrespective of any policy and regulation. And we call that our harmonized control framework. And this harmonized control framework, some of the grounding principles of that is one, context-based measurements. And again, we keep going back to this notion of context because so much of measurement and defining what you're going to measure depends upon the use.
Yeah.
And as you can see, most of the regulations and standards right now, unfortunately, are not context-based.
So you mean there should be a different regulation for an AI that has this amount of power and is used by this amount of people in these ways, and a different kind of regulation for, much smaller AI in a totally different context?
You can say that's obviously high level, but I think simpler would be what you want to measure, let's say, again, customer service chatbot versus what you might want to measure in a situational awareness robot that is deployed in a war zone. Way different things.
Yeah.
So you can't be measuring the same thing. For that robot, you're not going to say, are you fair or unfair, right?
But that's kind of interesting, right? I mean, well, actually for the robot you are, right? Did you make the right decision, kill decision, or wrong kill decision? But it is like a set of basic different choices. But you can't have a million AI regulations, right? Once you start to head down the road and you say, okay, context-specific AI regulations are important, yes, totally. But that could also lead to like an impossibility problem.
And yes, and I think this is where there's a fine balance around sector-specific, context-specific use cases. My worry is that we are saying, oh my God, this is what high-level regulation is. Everyone should be following it. I think maybe you can have some sort of high level guardrails around transparency. You can have some high level guardrails around explanations. But I think at the end of the day, it does matter what is the use case and how you're going to measure it. And yes, does that mean you're going to have different kinds of policies? Yes, you will. I don't think you're going to have one set of policies. And that's what makes policy making difficult, by the way.
Oh, it's never easy. Okay, give me 3 regulations that you really like, and they can be national. They can be like Singapore's policy, right? Or they can be state. So give me 3 regulations that you think are genuinely good.
Oh, I don't think any of them are good right now.
Really?
But no, I don't. And I think there's a lot of work that needs to happen in making it better. But let me give you some examples. So again, not good and bad, but we did a lot of work, for example, on the New York City Law number 144, which basically is saying, hey, if you are as an organization are using a third party HR system to make a determination who should be hired within a company, you need to have some audit capabilities and you need to present that audit report externally on your website. I think that is good. The problem with not so good was they didn't really define what you need to measure and how you need to measure it and what kind of test results need to be published externally. So that's why, Nick, I'm very nervous to give you like what's my favorite because it's a complex problem. And I think the sooner we recognize that, the better, because one, policy is not able to keep pace with AI innovation. I mean, policy is taking first and foremost too long. But the second is bad policy actually could kill a lot of good AI innovation. And that's why now what we are trying to do at Credo AI is really trying to help businesses within their context of use create guardrails in terms of what they can measure and what they can transparently share with customers.
Wow, you're in a complicated position where you feel like proper governance is absolutely essential for there being an equal world and for the West winning the AI race. On the other hand, you can't name a single AI law that you think is actually a really good example of AI governance. Tell me what your favorite part of the Trump AI Act was.
There was a statement on, I think, page 5, which is one of my favorite statements in the AI action plan, which says, I don't think we have a dearth of AI capabilities. What we have is a challenge with having the right governance and trust with this technology.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot to unpack there because even though I said I don't have a favorite regulation and policy, good components exist. EU Act is getting a lot of backlash, but there are some good components around risk and risk framework within that.
Totally.
Singapore's model governance, it was one of the early versions of what good model governance should look like, grounded in transparency. But again, it's not sufficient. You need to do more. So I think when I read that statement in the AI action plan, I think what's really important is what's next.
Yeah.
What are we doing about governance of open source models? Because we want open source to be pervasive in US, and how do we make that ecosystem thrive? When we say, oh, we need to have a standards ecosystem, great. What do these standards look like, especially based on scientific measurements that need to be context based? So there's a lot to unpack, a lot to do, but I just wish there was more investment into these areas and more faster action, which is not happening.
I'm glad you mentioned open source because my favorite part of the Trump AI action plan was all the support for open source. I feel like we made mistakes in this country and let the open source development move to China. And I have been an ideological believer. I believe that open source, often wins out. And I believe it's essential for the U.S. to have powerful open source models. Let me ask you this on the question of governance. Is the problem that humans aren't really up to task and we should just be essentially designing AI models that can either govern themselves or AI models optimized for governance that can govern the other AI models?
I think there's a couple of core things that's happening. And by the way, this is a really important topic as we go into agentic AI, Nick, as well, because there the question is not are humans adapt to do governance, but I think we won't be able to, because one, as the agents start communicating with other agents, we will not be in the loop. We are going to be maybe completely out of the loop. So the question is, in this new agentic AI world where the agency is being given to the agents, what is the role humans going to play in terms of governance of these systems is a really important one. So are we adept at doing governance? I think with the right insights, and especially for high risk applications, humans are adept at doing good governance. The problem that we are going to run into is the speed and scale of these systems and the agency that these systems have. I don't think humans are going to be able to keep up with this AI powered world. And that's where we need to use more AI to govern AI.
So in 5 years, are we going to have a bunch of AI laws that we're kind of refining as these models change, or will we just basically set up an AI governance system that is based on AI?
A great question. I would say we're going to have both. And obviously, on the first, are we going to have the right set of guardrails? That is the work that Credo AI is doing. I hope we continue to get investment, to get traction, to get our customers believing in us so that on this important mission, we continue to do that. But we already at Credo AI have started to use AI to govern AI because we are recognizing, especially in this agentic and multi-agent world, we literally cannot have humans governing it at the speed and scale needed.
Yeah, you need a good guy with an AI to stop a bad guy with an AI. And Navrina, you talk a lot about trust and trusting systems, and we're about to enter this world. We're almost maybe in it with Sora. We have no idea what's real anymore. We have no idea what's true. I call it the post-reality, right? How are we going to build trust into a system where we have no idea what's human, what's AI generated, what's ground truth?
This is a question that keeps me up at night. And this is a reason why I am so passionate about what we've created here at Credo AI, because I think we are entering a phase where defining what trust and truth is going to get more and more complex. So I think as a starting point, what becomes really critical is one, businesses, enterprises, agencies holding themselves accountable to disclosure, where they're using AI, where they're not using AI. And I think this is where some of the work that is being done in the ecosystem around content provenance becomes really important. Because without that, I think, especially for a person who is not AI forward, they're just going to see a bunch of Sora ads. And if they don't see the Sora sticker, they are just going to assume it's true. So that becomes a very challenging world for our democracy. And then the second thing is really defining what you're going to measure and can you actually measure it becomes really critical, but also stating what you weren't able to measure. I think we just have to be very thoughtful about the systems that we are putting out in the world and taking accountability for it.
It's great. Navrina, what's the most surprising or interesting way that you have personally used AI recently? We ask all our guests this.
Oh, I love this question. So, Nick, I have an 11-year-old daughter who is massively creative, talented, and now into concerts. Loves all the musicians from Benson Boone to Taylor Swift. And as you know, I have an insane schedule. I travel a lot to customers and events, etc. So what I did was I ended up building a very interesting agent on OpenAI, which basically looks at my calendar. It looks at some of her favorite artists. And based on that information, it's able to propose that, hey, Navrina, you're going to be in New York and looks like Benson Boone is playing. Do you want to attend his concert? So I never miss out on a concert. So I'm the super mom who's doing good for the world and good for the daughter as well.
And do you bring her on those trips when you can?
When I can, yes, she joins me. And we actually were at a Benson Boone concert in San Francisco. So that's why it's top of mind for me, because I would not have known if my agent had not shared with me that there is Benson Boone playing in Chase Center.
That is fantastic. I went to my first concert with my middle son to a Little Uzi Vert concert. It was very, very fun. Thank you so much, Navrina Singh, for joining us on The Most Interesting Thing in AI.
Thank you so much, Nick.
This has been The Most Interesting Thing in AI. I'm Nicholas Thompson. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, please rate and review this on the podcast platform of your choice. And let us know what AI-related topics you'd like us to cover in the future. Next week, for our final episode of this season, I'll be joined by Bill Gross, the entrepreneur and founder of ProRata AI, to talk about how creators can protect their work in the age of AI.